shinies. So today we're going to be talking about Volibear. Why are we talking about Volibear? Because I did a community post and Volibear by far, with 5 champions, Volibear got 37% of the votes for what champion you guys wanted to see a guide on. So in front of you, and this kind of goes into the point I'm making later, in front of you is a quick play game. Why am I not showing a ranked game? Because there is absolutely no way that I would play Volibear in a ranked game. And you guys generally like seeing footage of the champion while I talk about them. So here's your footage. It's just a quick play game. Their Twitch was even trolling. Why was their Twitch trolling? Because he was rank restricted and he needed to go play normal games to remove it. So he went into quick play and he trolled to get the games to get over as quickly as they could. So that kind of, yeah. So that's just the whole setup there. Now let's talk about Volibear. Volibear is bad. He is not doing very good right now at all. He is quite not doing good at all. Something though that a lot of people don't know, or I guess didn't think about, is Volibear has been doing very, very bad for a very long time. Volibear has not had a good win rate for a very, 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 very long time. In fact, it's not a season 14 issue. It seems to be a Volibear issue. Even if you look back into season 13, his win rates are basically the same that they are now. They're a little bit lower now, so he's actually gotten a little bit worse, but not even by that much. Basically, he's just as bad as he ever used to be. So if you want to play Volibear, I guess my caution against you is just that this champion is not good right now. I'll talk about this more when I go through the items themselves, but one of the problems right now is you have 2 builds you can go on Volibear. You have the full AP Giga, murder build, and it's fun and it's what I used in this video, but that build is just not viable the higher rank you go. Instead, you need to go with an Iceborne Gauntlet build. The problem with Iceborne Gauntlet is that you can't obviously go Iceborne Gauntlet anymore into physical damage, into magical damage champions. And even the magical damage champions that you go Iceborne Gauntlet into, a lot of them have magic damage at this point. So they bypass through that armor. Even if the armor mattered, it's not even that much armor. Volibear doesn't really have a good build right now at all. Like, it's not that the items are bad, it's just that Volibear can't really, like, he himself is just not a good champion. He can't really get into range anymore because his Q is so slow. To give you some perspective here, let's use, let's say Lalaya, fancy running Scottish shy deer girl, okay? She can get faster than Volibear can by, like, 2 items. And I mean faster than Volibear could ever get to. Volibear literally will never be in a position where he could ever catch that champion. With Twisted Fate being so popular, with Aatrox being so popular, there's just a lot of champions who Volibear will struggle to ever realistically get into range of these days. And it makes the champion not great. Riot could go through and they could give him a little bit of movement speed on his Q. Like, it doesn't even need to be that much. But like, I'm looking at right now, his movement speed right now is 16 to 48%. For a champion who has to get into range and has no way of, getting into range otherwise, he is really not that fast of a champion. Additionally, his armor and magic resist are, I'm not going to say super low, but they're lower than a normal Juggernaut's, which means that he can't even try to go into like a Dead Man's Plate Sterix build like Darius can, to just say, screw it, I'll get into range using this slow resist, using this tenacity, I'll get into range and then just use my massive base damage. Because here's the other problem, Volibear's base damage is not really that amazing either. It's okay, his base damage is definitely not bad, but it's certainly not, it's not as amazing as other champions are. Now his W heal is quite good, but even his W heal in modern League is not really enough to continue to keep the champion viable. All of this is to say, to warn everybody that this champion is just not really that good right now. So that's it. That's the entire intro I have to Volibear. The champion is just not doing really that good right now, and play him at your own risk. But what builds would I recommend at Volibear? Well, let's go look at that right now. So what is one of the big reasons that Volibear isn't good right now? He doesn't have a good first item for playing into magic damage champions. He has a good item for playing into physical damage champions, and that one is Iceborne Gauntlet. It's extremely cheap. It gives him a perma-slow, ability haste, damage on hit, the health, armor, right? Like, this is a very good item for Volibear for dealing with physical damage champions. If you combine Iceborne Gauntlet with Ionian Boots Lucidity, which I should hopefully remind myself to get into later. In fact, I'm gonna do that right now, just so I don't forget about it. But at either rate, Iceborne Gauntlet is extremely good first item on Volibear. The problem is, if you're playing to a magic damage champion, it isn't really buildable. So what do? You generally have to go with a first item Nashor's Tooth, which sucks and is completely counterproductive and basically kills the champion. What do I mean by that? So unfortunately, Volibear has the issue where if he's landing into a ranged magic damage champion, and most magic damage champions are some sort of ranged creature, he literally can't function. Iceborne Gauntlet becomes a dead option because all it does is give 300 health, and going this item is just troll tier into magic damage, right? But then he has no MR options that are good first. You might say, oh, Spear Visage. No, Spear Visage first item would not work out. You might say, oh, the MR Sunfire. No, that item also doesn't work out. Canik Rookern. Canik Rookern is probably like his best option, to be blunt. But even then, we're talking about an item that gives no armor, no ability haste, no movement speed, no damage, nothing. Canik Rookern is just survivability, and it's getting nerfed next patch anyway. So all he can do into magic damage champions is go Nashor's Tooth. And the higher rank you go, and the better you do, the less and less viable it is to first item a Nashor's Tooth. As you saw in my little footage there, it's quite a good item on him. It's very good, but the higher rank you go, the less and less powerful this item rush becomes. Now, no matter what you do, he does seem to have a pretty good second option. Riftmaker pretty much is good on Volibear from what I've seen in basically every situation. Volibear's fairly decent base damage, and his health scaling and his insanely good ability power scaling means that this item is just quite good on him. Doing up to 10% more damage on a champion like Volibear is quite good. Getting lots of ability power on him is quite good. Getting lots of Omnivamp on him is, you might not believe this, quite good. So Riftmaker just sort of is extremely good on Volibear. So if you go first item Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker, this is a build that I've seen that just does good on Volibear. In most situations, this build just ends up being quite good. Very potent, very powerful, okay? So, this generally here, I'm just going to leave Riftmaker here alone, because I think that in basically every situation right now, Riftmaker should be your second buy option on Volibear. If you went Nashor's Tooth, then Nashor's Tooth Riftmaker is really good. If you went Iceborne Gauntlet, then Iceborne Gauntlet Riftmaker is shockingly really good. So what are you going to go third item? Well, you have two options, in my opinion. Your first option is Hullbreaker. Now, I did leave in a little clip at the end of the video I just showed you about Hullbreaker. Hullbreaker absolutely obliterates turrets, and it absolutely obliterates inhibitors, because Volibear, with his current builds, can't really function very well in team fights. Hullbreaker allows him to split push and annihilate side objectives and force an opponent to come up to match him. Without Hullbreaker, particularly if you go, for example, Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker, you might not have the DPS to really be a threat on a split push, meaning the opponents can give up maybe one turret, beat your team in a team fight, take Baron, come back, stop your split push, and then go on to proceed to win the game, right? So the problem is, Hullbreaker really asserts itself as a dominant item here. Now, the other option you can go with is Spear Visage. Now, Spear Visage has insane synergy with Volibear and should generally find itself in your build at some point. At some point, you should probably go Spear Visage, but yeah, that's all I have to say. The problem with going Spear Visage third is you're kind of resigning yourself into more of like a team fight, because you might find yourself once again in a position where if you went Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker into Spear Visage, you have armor, you have MR, you have lots of HP, healing, shielding, but you're still really not that amazing at team fighting, and now your split pushing isn't that great either, and teams can often find themselves in a position to be able to ignore you because you'll take too long to take turrets. This kind of plays into why I just don't think that Volibear is that amazing right now. He just doesn't really seem to have like the greatest win conditions. Like Trundle, no matter what Trundle does, he'll obliterate turrets, right? So Trundle can always be a split pusher, and if he can't team fight, if he's in a situation where like the opposing team is just too good at 5v5ing and he just can't get in there and he just says, screw it, right? I'll just go split push. There's any build he can do will be good at knocking out turrets. Volibear can end up in the same situation where he looks at the opposing team comp and he goes, I can't 5v5, so he goes to try to force a split push, but then he has to go Hullbreaker, which then in return, let's say you went Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker into Hullbreaker. Well, have you noticed that with this build, you do have a lot of HP, sure, but now you're running into the issue where you only have 50 armor and no magic resist. So now you're actually kind of squishy, and maybe you actually lose in the split push to your opponent 1v1, right? So he's just in a very awkward position right now, I'll say. He's in a very awkward position. But I would say, generally speaking, these are going to be like your core items. Let's call them that, okay? Now, Nashers do this perfectly fine until you reach, like, I think it's around Emerald. It's not like you hit Emerald, you're just like, I'm doing fine. And then you hit Emerald, just, right? Like, it does worse and worse. I have to, like, mirror it. It does worse and worse and worse the higher rank you go, right? So, like, you kind of need to judge for yourself. Especially, you need to judge, like, how you're doing. Did you get a good early game? Sure, go Nashers 2 Snowball, right? Did you not get a good early game? Sure, go Iceborne Gauntlet. Are you fighting a magic resist champion? Cry about it, because that's all you can really do, right? So then I would say these are like your core other builds. Riftmaker seems to generally just be good in every situation, and you should always go Riftmaker. There seems to be literally no world where Riftmaker will ever be bad on Volibear. Hullbreaker or Spirit Visage depends on your game state, right? Hullbreaker if you need a split push, Spirit Visage if you think you can actually try to team fight and you need some magic resist to be able to do it, right? So I would say you're not going to literally build all 5 of these, right? But 3 of these 5 and always Riftmaker will generally find yourself in there. So then what are you going to finish off your build? You've gone with a typical Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker into Hullbreaker. What are you going to do next, right? Well, at that point, I'm going to put Spirit Visage down here again because you know, if you've gone Iceborne Gauntlet into Riftmaker into Hullbreaker, Spirit Visage is now really good. So that's a good 4th item, right? More healing, more shielding, decent base stats. I'm not saying like Spirit Visage is the strongest item ever, but as a champion who is healing and who has shielding in his base kit, this seems to be doing pretty good on him. So Spirit Visage seems to form a pretty good item. Then you have your Thornmail. Why Thornmail? Because it does pretty good for reducing healing and giving you armor and giving you health. Thornmail is one of those weird quirky items where basically every melee champion, especially every Juggernaut, can go Thornmail. I don't think there's a single Juggernaut / melee champion in the game that can't fit Thornmail into their build. It's just a very powerful item, and even though it doesn't have the most synergy with most champions, especially like with this build, like you're not building the most armor, right? But it'll still be a pretty good item for you. Then of course you have your Frozen Heart. Once again, it's a bit, you know, it can be a bit questionable, but we get good ability haste, good mana. I mean, you're probably not going to need mana late game, but you get decent armor. Now, the problem here, you have no health on this item. So some of the synergy with your kit is going away, but you get the intense attack speed reduction, you get the attack damage to you reduction. So if you're fighting certain champions where, you know, shredding their attack speed is pretty good, then this item can be, you guessed it, pretty good. Frozen Heart, if you're fighting certain champions that don't heal a lot, let's say Jax, Frozen Heart can outperform Thornmail, but that's not to say Thornmail is bad in a Jax. It just, if you're on the split push, Frozen Heart might end up being a little bit better. It might not be better though as well. I mean, you have to weigh your situation, right? Like it's complicated with tank items these days because a lot of them are quite good, but they're good in different situations. Then of course you have I'm going to call these your more conditional items. These are items that you might not go every time, but you know, they might work out. I'm going to put these, your Stark's Gauge, your Deadman's Plate. Deadman's Plate tends to be undervalued in my opinion on most Juggernaut style champions. Now on Volibear, I don't think it's like a core item by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like it's not like Darius, right? Where like basically there's no situation where Darius doesn't go Deadman's Plate at some point, right? But Volibear, he would go Deadman's Plate if he's fighting certain champions. Are you fighting Ashe? Deadman's Plate can be quite good because you get that 25% slow resist, so now you can actually get into range. Are you fighting a champion like Aatrox? Deadman's Plate then can be good because it allows you to just, you know, just zoop and just always leave his W so you can't really get kited. So in these situations, Deadman's Plate can be good. Is it good by default? Is it good? Oh, I'm fighting I don't even know, Jack's top, then no. Am you fighting Darius top? Then no, right? Like, I'm just saying, like, if you're fighting Aurelia top, Fiora top, Camille top, then no, Dead Man's Plate is not going to be good in those situations, obviously, right? So that's why I'm putting it here into the conditional category. Steric's Gauge is kind of the same situation. It gives you 20% tenacity. Then it gives you the health, the damage, and the shield. So do you need tenacity? Are you in a situation where tenacity is make or break? Then go Steric's Gauge, right? Like, do you understand that? But don't go Steric's Gauge if you don't need tenacity. And don't go Steric's Gauge, realistically speaking, unless you actually need Steric's Gauge. Because, you know, to be blunt, just because you're fighting an Ashe doesn't make Steric's Gauge good. Just because you're fighting a Darius doesn't mean the Steric's Gauge shield is going to be good. Volibear has a shield, he has a heal, he has Spear Visage, right? So he by himself is already going to be kind of a shieldy champion, right? So he doesn't need, I mean, it's good on him, but he doesn't need this sort of item. Then, of course, you get your typical Jack Show. Jack Show, once again, I'm putting these in the conditional, so I don't think, like, these are items that are like finishing off your build, right? These are potential 4th and 5th items, but like, I'm not saying that these are core to your kit by any stretch of imagination. But Jack Show, if you've gone with a more tankier build, so let's say you skimped on the Hull Breaker, let's say your only damage item is Hull Breaker, or sorry, your only damage item is Rift Maker, right? So let's say you have an Iceborne Gauntlet into Rift Maker, into Spear Visage. At this point, you might just say, screw it, Jack Show. So now I've got 3 tank items. The longer in the fight that it goes on, the more armor and magic resist I get, right? So after 5 seconds, I get that boost. I get that health, that armor, the magic resist baseline, so I can't really get burst down as easily. I still probably can get burst down, but maybe not as easily. So Jack Show does show up, and Jack Show is doing good, but I would call it more of a niche item because, what's the right way to put this? I think Volibear is very good into long fights early in the game, but his passive tends to not scale very good, and his W tends to not, like, his W scales, but it's just like not on the same level, right? So like early in the game, Volibear might be very capable of taking Darius in a long fight, but later in the game, by like 3-4 items, if the fight goes on for a while, Volibear is going to get crushed by Darius, right? Like, there's going to come a certain point where a dude with 200 bonus damage from his passive, who's doing 100 physical damage a second from his passive, who also has 40% armor pen with a 1400 damage execute, there's just going to come a time where that dude is going to beat you in a long fight, and there's, you know, getting 20% extra attack speed from your passive isn't really going to do much, right? So that's why I think Jack Show tends to do worse on Volibear compared to on some other champions. That's not to say it's a bad item, but don't think, now that I've built this long fight tank build, now I can beat people, right? Like, it just, Volibear compared to other juggernauts is just not as good in a long fight, and I'm sure most of you guys have noticed that. So I would say, oh, I forgot my best buddy, Kinnick Rookern. Kinnick Rookern is also quite good. Volibear seems to be one of the only champions in the game where Spear Visage seems to outperform Kinnick Rookern on average. He seems to be the only champion in the game where that's true that I've seen. So assuming though that you do need more magic resist, assuming that you have the Spear Visage, then Kinnick Rookern can come in, and if you're fighting that double or triple mage comp, Kinnick Rookern can come in and be ta-da, now I'm extremely survivable against magic damage. And the only problem with Kinnick Rookern is it doesn't help you split push. I mean, it can, like, if you're fighting a burst mage and you just want to be able to not die, right? It can be good, right? But what's the right way to put this? Volibear should be focusing mostly on trying to help his split pushing, because I just don't think he's that good of a team fighter at all. And I think most people would agree with me on that one. Volibear can, like, team fight early and mid game, but like by late game, he's just not a good team fighter. You can build to try to survive mages, and then you die to their AD carry. You can build to survive their AD carry, and then you can kind of just get perma-kited. You can build to not get kited, and then you just get burst down because the anti-kite items are really not that survivable because his base stats are just really not that good. So I'd say this is kind of generally what I would go. On Volibear, here's what I would recommend. You know, kind of these steer near these items. That's kind of what I would recommend on the champion. Now let's move on to his runes. Okay, so the problem with Volibear is he has 2 different rune sets that, in my opinion, let's just say he's got 2 different rune sets, and the problem is that between the 2 different rune sets, they seem to have very different ranks at which they perform well. So here we have the first rune set, which I'm going to dub, I always go with present to mind, forgot about that one. I'm going to dub this rune set the lower rank one. Okay, you're going to go precision. You've got that lethal tempo. You've got presence of mind to give you infinite mana. You've got last stand because you're always going to be lower HP on Volibear. You've got demolish. You've got revitalize. This helps you incredibly. You've got that ability haste into double health per level. And, you know, throughout this build, I would say this build is quite good. This build, definitely at like the lower ranks, in like where people just run up and sweaty beat the crap out of each other, this build is quite good, and there's basically nothing wrong with this build. The problem is the higher and higher rank you go, the more the game becomes about short trades and less about sweaty deathmatching 1v1. So once the game starts becoming, you know, people start knowing what they're doing and they're poking and they're kiting and they're not just sweaty deathmatching, grasping and dying tends to start outperforming the other build. So then in this situation, I would flip over to some sort of this build, especially if fighting a ranged champion in particular, or like a champion that you can't just all in, who won't just stand next to you, right? This build tends to perform better. Remember, your Q and your W proc grasping and dying. So even if they run away from your trade, even if they kite you out, all you have to do is hit them with one Q or one W, and you proc that grasping and dying, which gives you permanent 7 HP. Demolish is always good because, you know, kills turrets. Bone plating or second wind tend to be good. You know, depending on the situation that, you know, you're kind of facing. If you're getting poked down, you can go second win. If you're fighting a champion who just all-ins or does like good trades, you can go bone plating. Like bone plating is underrated against Riven because she tends to proc it a lot in her trades, which then, you know, you can play around that. And then revitalize for your W heal and your Q, or say your W heal and your E shield. Overgrowth is definitely... Yeah, Overgrowth. Okay, so the problem is Revitalize outperforms Overgrowth in most situations unless the game goes on for very, very long periods of time, at which point Overgrowth will generally be equal to Revitalize. So Overgrowth can perform, but it's just like in most situations, Revitalize is just going to be better in the early game, the mid game, and almost as good in the late game anyway. So, you know, realistically, what are you doing, right? Then you have your presence of mind into your legend tenacity. I would recommend these two. And then you've got your ability haste, double health scaling. Now, the attack speed versus ability haste is kind of interesting, but the problem is that Volibear needs to get to his second W. I totally forgot to go over the boots, even though I showed the boots there. The problem is Volibear needs to get to his second W. Just using the first W isn't good enough. He needs to get to that second W. Ability haste allows him to get to that second W. He also gets attack speed in his kit anyway, and he might not have the most attack speed, but from what I know, attack speed doesn't even increase the animation time on his Q or his W anyway. And so long as you have Riftmaker, your passive is going to be giving you somewhere around like 60% attack speed anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. Ability haste is just very, very good at a champion who likes using abilities. Then the double health scaling rune is just very, very good on Volibear because he scales very, very hard with his health. He gets healing based on missing HP, shielding based on his HP, and damage based on his HP. Shockingly, these things tend to be very good. Now, you can go with the tenacity and slow resist in a pinch, like if you absolutely must have to. Like if you're just getting permakited by a slow base champion, then it can be fine. But in most situations, I think the double health rune is just going to be performing the best. Okay, one last thing, because I forgot to go over it. We need to go back into items and talk about this, okay? Boots. Okay, let's talk about boots. What boots should you go on Volibear? They don't show up if you type boots. Okay, what boots should you go on Volibear, right? Let's remove that one. Should you go? You're going to go Ionian Boots Lucidity in basically every situation. I'm just going to tell you that. The reason for this is that Ionian Boots Lucidity tend to outperform all other boots on Volibear quite considerably. It's not by some small amount. It's not by a little bit. Ionian Boots Lucidity seem to outperform Mercury Treads or Plated Steel Caps by an excessively large amount. Now, the problem here, the only situation I would still go Plated Steel Caps is when you absolutely must have to. So if you're fighting a champion who like you're fighting a Quinn or something, right? Like at that point, yes, you just have to go plated steel caps, right? So there are situations where you absolutely must go plated steel caps, but because of what I just talked about with the ability haste, with how Volibear functions, the problem is that he must get to his second W. If Volibear gets to his second W, he does a crap load of damage and he heals a lot and he wins the trade basically automatically. If he doesn't get to his second W, he loses most trades horribly and tends to not do a lot. This means that Ironing Boots and Lucidity are extraordinarily good on Volibear. I cannot emphasize enough just how good these boots are in Volibear. I've never seen a win rate split this hard on Ironing Boots. Normally Ironing Boots are like better, they have a higher win rate, but their pick rate is like super low and their win rate is only like 1 to 2 to 3% higher, right? Ironing Boots and Lucidity on Volibear are like a 4 to 5% higher win rate with like a pretty decent pick rate as well. Ironing Boots and Lucidity are just so good on Volibear. In 90% of situations, I would just recommend go Ironing Boots of Lucidity. Unless, again, you absolutely must go plated steel caps because, like, you're fighting a Vayne or a Quinn or, you know, something like that. So that's going to be the end of this video. That's what I'm going to recommend on Volibear. Again, you know, let's be blunt here, guys. It's Volibear. I can only recommend so much. I can only do so much for you guys. So go out there, do your best with Volibear, and let's hope Ride buffs him eventually. So thank you guys, and have a great rest of your day.